Here's John Lennox to say a bunch of silly things about science.
You see, I am a scientist, and one of the fascinating things is that science is a direct legacy of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
In order to think that science is somehow the product of a Judeo-Christian worldview, you have to do some pretty contorted reasoning. A lot of the major contributions to science over the last several hundred years were made in predominantly Christian countries, but this is largely in spite of those countries' Christianity rather than because of it. Galileo was persecuted, and even today many Judeo-Christians are not fans of Darwin. In terms of the methodology of science, there aren't many folks who are more influential than David Hume, Ernst Mach, and Karl Popper. Hume and Mach were atheists, and Popper called himself an agnostic. Einstein said that he came up with the theory of relativity by following the scientific methods of Hume and the ideas of Mach. None of them based their ideas about how science ought to be done on any premises that can sensibly be called religious.
You were saying we're all scientists now and all this is... No, it is not. And let's start absolutely basic. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Hebrew Bible, written millennia ago, knew there was a beginning. It was in the early 60s before scientists caught up with that. And the Bible was right. And Dawkins said, well, there was a 50-50 chance when I debated him. And I said, at least the Bible got it right.
Like I've said in other videos, Muslim scriptures say to wash your hands, and Muslim apologists sometimes argue that this is evidence of divine foreknowledge of germ theory. I doubt this would convince Lennox to become a Muslim, but he thinks that what is essentially the same argument is convincing evidence that the Bible knew about the Big Bang.
But more seriously than that, you see, the fact that I'm a mathematician and interested in science, just think about that. The fact that mathematics can describe what goes on in the universe is a matter of huge wonder. Einstein once said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. And he saw the problem. Why does it work?
Math was invented for the purpose of describing the universe. Why would it be a mysterious coincidence that the system we designed for the purpose of describing the universe would be effective at describing the universe? That's like being astonished at the fact that axes can cut down trees.
Well, it's not an incomprehensible thing if you start from the idea that there's an intelligent God who made us in his image, and therefore we can do science. And that's exactly what the early pioneers of modern science, starting with Galileo and Kepler and Newton and so on and so forth, they were all believers in God.
As I mentioned earlier, the folks who actually worked out how to do science most effectively were not all believers in God.
And therefore, when I hear that kind of question, I'm not remotely ashamed of being a scientist and a Christian, because I want to argue that it was Christianity gave me my subject.
Really, your subject, if you're referring to science, as it is currently practiced, was largely given to you by folks like David Hume, Ernst Mach, Karl Popper, and Bertrand Russell, and none of them were Christian.
C.S. Lewis said, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in the lawgiver.
C.S. Lewis is wrong. He seems to misunderstand what laws even are. He talks about them as though they are behests, like legislated laws. Physical laws are simply descriptions of observed regularities. And it's a complete non sequitur to infer that where there are regularities, there must be a regulator. There is absolutely no reason to assume that the default state of reality is randomness and chaos, and any order that we see must have been deliberately imposed by something.
And I think we're getting to the stage now where serious atheist thinkers are beginning to re-examine the kind of naturalism that reduces everything to physics and chemistry. And one of them lives in New York. His name is Thomas Nagel. And he's a brilliant philosopher. And he says something's going wrong, because if everything is reducible to physics and chemistry, then so is your mind. But then why would you trust your mind? In other words, atheism, taken to its logical conclusion, undermines the very rationality you need to trust to do science.
Well, let's say that instead of your mind being physical, it's a spooky ghost that has taken possession of your body. Why would a mind like that be more trustworthy? It's so weird to me that Lennox and Nagel would think that the fact that our minds are subject to the same laws those minds are describing would make those minds less able to accurately describe them. Why would minds that do not behave according to the laws of physics be better able to describe or observe the laws of physics? Why would a mind that actually carries out the laws of physics be less able to observe or describe them accurately? Maybe Lennox believes that if the mind behaves deterministically, then you're not reasoning, you're just reacting. That's what Frank Turek sometimes says. But why can't reasoning be a reaction? It seems to me that if your mind is following some kind of deterministic inferential principles, then its reasoning is far more reliable than if it's just freely choosing conclusions. If your reasoning is completely free of any kind of deterministic principles, then you're not really reasoning. You're just drawing random conclusions. Perhaps Lennox believes that if material processes control our minds, then it is those processes that do the thinking rather than you. And you can't trust that thinking if you are not the one doing it. But if those material processes are in fact you, and you are not some spooky ghost, then what reason is there to be any more distrustful of one's conclusions? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.